What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Okay, so as we know, Donald Trump made a campaign promise talking about the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, however you want to phrase it, right? And he was like, I'm going to end that war in 24 hours. Well, it's been like 2.5 months at this point, and they're still fighting, Trump. What are you doing, buddy? Well, check this out. Putin agrees in principle with proposal for Ukraine ceasefire and says more discussions are needed. So we're finally getting some steps in the right direction here. After 4 years, it's been over 4 years at this point. Check this out, y'all. Russian President Vladimir Putin said Thursday that he agrees in principle with a U.S. proposal for a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine, but he emphasized that the terms are yet to be worked out and added that any truce should pave the way to lasting peace. The idea itself is correct, and we certainly support it, Putin told a news conference in Moscow. But there are issues that we need to discuss, and I think we need to talk about it with our American colleagues and partners and perhaps have a call with President Trump and discuss it with him. President Donald Trump said there have been good signals coming out of Russia and offered guarded optimism about Putin's statement. He reiterated that he's ready to speak with Putin and underscored that it was time to end the war. Putin put out a very promising statement, but it wasn't complete, Trump said Thursday at a start of a meeting at the White House with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Now we're going to see whether or not Russia's there, and if they're not, it'll be a very disappointing moment for the world. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Putin is essentially preparing to reject that ceasefire. And you know, this is just standard run-of-the-mill for Zelensky. This guy has found himself a treasure trove of money with the United States. Of course, not anymore, but he wants to continue this war for some reason because he, for some reason, thinks he can get invaded by Russia and they take over land and he gets to keep it. He gets to boot Putin out. You know, I just don't understand what Zelensky is thinking in all of this. Look, sometimes you got to make concessions, right? And just because Putin is an evil guy, he's a dictator or whatever, and he comes in and takes some of your land, well, you know what? Putin holds all the cards in this, right? It's not incumbent upon the United States to come to your assistance. I'm sorry. That is not our job. Our job is to negotiate peace. That's what we're supposed to be doing in this world. We are not the world's police. We cannot dictate terms to Russia. Russia is its own country. I mean, imagine, Russia dictating terms to us when we invaded Iraq, for crying out loud. How do you think that would have played out in American politics? I don't think anybody would have took kindly to that. So how do you think they are taking it? Right? And you might say, well, who cares about that? Well, you got to look at both perspectives. You can never just look at everything from a one-sided perspective. And that's what I get from a lot of people. They're like, well, Putin's a dictator. Well, yes. And so, what are you trying to say? He still has an entire country. 150 million people live in that country. Right? That's their own country. We have no say over what they do. What are you expecting from the United States on this? As a matter of fact, they invaded Ukraine, their neighbor, for crying out loud. It is not incumbent upon us to just send nothing but weapons to these people. We should be trying to stop the war by any means necessary. That's what the leader of the free world should be doing. We should not be supplying weapons to one side or the other. We shouldn't take sides, even though Putin is clearly in the wrong on this, right? He's got his reasons. And, a lot of people, when you start touting any of those reasons, and some of these are legitimate reasons, right? It still doesn't justify the invasion, but all of a sudden you become a Putin puppet, as if Russia has zero interests at all, or as if what you just said, like NATO encroachment, isn't true or something. That's absolutely true. That is a concern of Russia, for crying out loud, right? What was going on in the Donbass region was a concern of Russia. Don't know why they were concerned with that. Maybe they shouldn't have been, but they were. And they intervened, for crying out loud. Has nothing to do with us. I just don't understand this idea that Zelensky thinks that we're just going to continually supply him weapons and money. Well, I'm sorry. That buck has come to a stop, as a matter of fact. And, yeah, you need to come to the negotiating table because we're not going to be supplying you anymore, as a matter of fact. But, it is what it is. Putin is afraid to tell President Trump directly that he wants to continue this war. Though that sounds like projection right there. That he wants to kill Ukrainians, Zelensky said in his nightly address to the nation. That is why in Moscow they are surrounding the idea of a ceasefire with such preconditions that nothing will come of it, or at least it will be delayed as long as possible. The Russian president, he added, often acts this way. He doesn't say no outright, but ensures that everything drags on and that normal solutions become impossible. Putin, who launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine more than 3 years ago, noted that the need to control possible breaches of the truce and signaled that Russia would seek guarantees that Ukraine would not use the break in hostilities to rearm and continue mobilization. We agree with the proposals to halt the fighting, but we proceed from the assumption that the ceasefire should lead to long-lasting peace and remove the root causes of the crisis, Putin said. The Russian leader made the remarks just hours after the arrival of Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff in Moscow for talks on the ceasefire, which Ukraine has accepted. A Kremlin advisor said Putin planned to meet with Witkoff later Thursday. The diplomatic effort coincided with a Russian claim that its troops have driven the Ukrainian army out of a key town in Russia's Kursk border region, where Moscow has been trying for 7 months to dislodge Ukrainian troops from their foothold. Yeah, that's in Kursk. Russia questions details of truce offer. Putin said it appeared that the U.S. persuaded Ukraine to accept a ceasefire and that Ukraine is interested because of the battlefield situation, particularly in Kursk. Referring to the Ukrainian troops in Kursk, he questioned what will happen to them if the ceasefire takes hold. Will all those who are there come out without a fight, or will the Ukrainian leadership order them to lay down their arms and surrender? Putin thanked Trump for paying so much attention to the settlement in Ukraine. He also thanked the leaders of China, India, Brazil, South Africa for their noble mission to end the fighting, a statement that suggested those countries could be involved in a ceasefire deal. Russia has said it will not accept peacemakers from any NATO members to monitor a prospective truce. Putin's seemingly friendly tone toward the White House reflected the astonishing shift in U.S. relations with Russia and Ukraine since Trump returned to the office in January. Oh, astonishing, huh? Here we go. Under the administration of former President Joe Biden, the United States was Ukraine's staunchest and most powerful ally and a force for isolating the Kremlin. But Trump's election threw that policy into reverse. Here we go with the Putin puppetry. Trump briefly cut off critical military aid and intelligence sharing in an apparent effort to push Kyiv to enter talks to end the war, and Zelensky had a testy meeting with the White House on February 28th in which Trump questioned whether Ukraine wanted to halt the war. Yeah, he sure doesn't seem like he does to me. The Trump administration has also reportedly embraced Kremlin positions on the conflict, including indicating that Ukraine's hopes of joining NATO are unlikely to be realized and that it probably will not get back the land that Russia's army occupies, which amounts to nearly 20% of the country. Yeah, why would he give it up, as a matter of fact? This is just so fascinating to me that, NATO encroachment, for some reason, that's a Putin talking point. What? All of a sudden, if you mention NATO encroachment, which, hang on just a second, they're constantly talking about Russia never upholds any of its treaties. It always violates these. Well, you know what? NATO, as a matter of fact, agreed to not move a inch to the east when the Soviet Union fell. And that's all we've done since. So we haven't kept up our end of the deal either. So, yeah, we've both done that. And this is the kind of both sides thing you got to look at, right? Like, the United States is not an angel. We do bad moves on the world stage, as a matter of fact. And the quicker people can come to terms with that, the quicker you can see both sides have interests. And this is just competing interests here. It's not just that, oh, Russia's a dictator, right? Putin's a dictator. And we haven't done anything wrong. Like, Ukraine is one of the most corrupt nations in Europe. As a matter of fact, it was voted several times the most corrupt nation in Europe. So this isn't somebody we should be staunchly allied with, as a matter of fact, and just sending blank checks over there, weapons and all kinds of stuff. Right? That's ridiculous. That is the height of ignorance, if you will. Like, I just don't get that idea. Sure, it's bad that Putin invaded. I'll say this again. And he's a bad guy for invading, because nothing that took place justified a full-on invasion like that. But, you know, it is an arguable point that it was a full-scale invasion, as they said. Insane, y'all. The Russian Defense Ministry's claim that it recaptured the town of Sudza, a Ukrainian operations hub in Kursk, came hours after Putin visited his commanders in the Kursk region. That claim could not be independently verified. Ukrainian officials made no immediate comment. Yeah. Administration repeats threat of new sanctions. Right, so this is funny. They just came off this railing against Trump for, having these Kremlin talking points. But check this out. As Trump seeks a diplomatic end to the war, he has made veiled threats to hit Russia with new sanctions if it does not engage with peace efforts. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told CNBC Thursday that Trump is willing to apply maximum pressure on both sides, including sanctions that reach the highest scale on Russia. So which one is it, corporate press? They can't both be true. Trump can't be a Putin puppet and also apply these maximum amount of sanctions onto Russia at the same time. That doesn't make any sense, does it? The U.S. still has about $3.85 billion in congressionally authorized funding for future arms shipments to Ukraine, but the Trump administration has shown no interest so far in using that authority to send additional weapons as it awaits the outcome of peace overtures. Yeah, when you're going into peace negotiations, sending one side a bunch of weapons, $3.85 billion worth of weapons, is probably not a good idea. By signaling its openness to a ceasefire at a time when the Russian military has the upper hand in the war, Ukraine has presented the Kremlin with a dilemma: whether to accept a truce and abandon hopes of making new gains, or reject the offer and risks derailing a cautious rapprochement with Washington. The Ukrainian army's foothold inside Russia has been under intense pressure for months from the renewed effort by Russian forces, backed by North Korean troops. Ukraine's daring incursion last August led to the first occupation of Russian soil by foreign troops since World War II and embarrassed the Kremlin. Oh, is that so? And that was the end of that story. Like, these people are just deranged, if you ask me. Like, come on, guys. Like, why do they mention certain things? Like, oh, it embarrassed. This is supposed to be news, right? That is a statement of opinion, by the way. Oh, and repeating Putin talking points, that's also an opinion, because if those talking points are actual facts, what, you don't believe in facts or something these days? Why does a fact have to be a talking point? You see what they try to do? These people are absurd, y'all. They don't know how to report factually on the news. They'll give you some facts, but they'll skew those facts in a certain direction, and I can't stand that. I'm just getting that off of my chest right quick. I can't stand the corporate press. Of course, y'all know that, though, but I'm curious to see as to what's going to happen with this. It's only a 30-day ceasefire, so that's a stopgap measure at best, right? So we need peace negotiations. We need Putin to actually extract himself from that area, right? Because, sure, I totally understand why, he wants his land bridge to the Black Sea. But, once again, if I was at that negotiating table, I would offer I would try to get Zelensky to agree to some sort of economic corridor for Russia through that region, right? Allow him access to Crimea. Allow him to keep Crimea. You keep the mainland of Ukraine. We'll go back to, 2014 on this. Let him keep Crimea because they've got an army base in Crimea, or a naval base, I believe. So give him an economic corridor to give him access to that Black Sea, because that's what this whole thing is about, right? It's not necessarily about NATO encroachment, although that probably is a factor, right? But this is more or less, the whole situation that was going on in the Donbass, right? Once again, that was a factor, but I personally believe that Putin just wants his land bridge because he needs that access to the Black Sea for economics reasons, right? That's what wars are always about. They're always about resources or territory that have resources on them, right? It's always economics, something to do with money, right? So that situation going on in the Donbass has nothing to do with economics. Absolutely nothing to do with economics. That was an uprising of rebels, civil war, whatever you want to call it, that was going on over there. That was internal politics for Ukraine to resolve, right? It had nothing to do with Russia. So there was no need for him to invade. A lot of people put out that argument that, yeah, those are ethnic Russians and they speak Russian. That doesn't matter at all, right? We have ethnic parts of the United States that are pretty much Mexican and they speak Spanish, right? You go to South Texas, there's signs in Spanish all over the place. And a lot of people speak Spanish, don't even speak English. So you can't use that as an excuse nor an argument. As a matter of fact, that, they're ethnically Russian. Don't care, don't matter. That's still internal Ukrainian politics, has nothing to do with Russia. Russia should not have intervened for that reason, but we know why they did, right? That's my speculation, at least, from looking at everything that's going on the ground. Because, the Qatar-Turkey pipeline, that was actually going to do an end run around Russia, and he can't have that. They need their economic corridor through there. That's what Russia wants, as a matter of fact, because that Qatar-Turkey pipeline, if it wasn't for Syria, right? This is why Russia is so heavily invested into Syria as well, because that pipeline was supposed to go through Syria. And Russia said no, because that would do an end run around. They wouldn't be able to sell their natural gas. That's their bread and butter, for crying out loud. So these things, these wars like this is always about economics or territory that have resources upon them, which is, once again, it draws that back to economics, right? So that's what I think. So if I was at that negotiating table, I would absolutely try to convince Zelensky to have some sort of neutral zone through there, right? It could be just a highway or something like that, right? That allows Russia to freely travel through there, give them, maybe a kilometer or something like that, either side of the highway if they wanted to build a pipeline or something, blah, 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 blah. But, allow the economy to flow freely through there. Let it be a neutral economic zone, right? Allow Russia to travel freely through there, because that's also a concern with Russia, with, Ukraine joining the EU or NATO or any of these other countries, because that's going to flood Ukraine with, goods from Europe. That's going to supplant Russian goods that they could possibly sell into Ukraine, damaging the economy of Russia. So Russia's going to act in its own interest to secure its own economy, for crying out loud. And that's, like I said, that's what this is all about. So I don't know if they're going to actually agree to that or if they've thought about that, but I heard it on a podcast somewhere. But anyway, I just kind of hope that this all works out soon, because we need gas prices to come back down, and they've been hiked up ever since this war started. And we got to get America back on track, y'all. We've got to get this country back going. And ending that war is definitely a priority for Trump. So hopefully he can get the job done, get the ball over the line, if you know what I mean. But I think I've rambled on for long enough on this one. I want y'all to let me know what y'all think. That's all I got on this one. I want to thank everybody for watching. And y'all try to have a good day. Stay logical. Peace.